So coming back to the discussions that we were having, we were considering about the revenue recognition related topic. I had given you this kind of a table with 7 values, and based on that we were trying to estimate how much is the project completion so far in like at any point of time you can figure out that, and then how much revenue has been recognized, and we were looking at different ways to call it as revenue. Earlier were more on the cash based principle, but then what we accept or what we usually use in our day-to-day examples, even within industry, is the percentage completion, and accordingly you determine the total revenue recognized so far, right? So now I just wanted to extend the same concept to a progress report or a when more from a headquarters perspective. That was a one particular project, but now from a headquarters perspective, if you want to assess from a financial perspective how different projects are performing, is everything going good on these projects in terms of whether the client related payments are coming on time, whether you are paying your vendors on time. This kind of monitoring, if you want to do across multiple projects, the same concepts can be used. So I'll just give you an example of that. In this, there is 2 essential terms that you just need to learn. These are not necessarily very rigorous or difficult to understand, but something called overbilling. So if you have billed your client more than what your revenue ideally should have been based on your project completion, it means you have overbilled, right? You have overbilled the client, you have asked the more money compared to what project revenue you should ideally be having at this stage. Compared to if you are underbilling, essentially your revenue, the recognized revenue should be higher compared to what you have billed to the client, right? So that's the easy to understand definition. It's if you are overbilling to the client, it means that your actual bill that you have raised is much more than the revenue that ideally or theoretical revenue that you should have, compared to if you are on an underbilling side, your actual revenue should be higher compared to what you have billed to the client, right? So this is an idea. Typically, if you can understand if you have overbilled your client or not overbilled your client, then if you are overbilling, more or less you are okay. As a contractor, you are okay because your time payments are coming to be timely. But if you're underbilled, then you need to look at something, whether in this particular project you can improve your client relationships and things like that, right? So that's the main idea. So suppose earlier we were looking at just one single project and all that information. Now I am giving that information for 4 different projects to you, right? So look at this calculation here. So contract values for project 1, 2, 3, 4 is given to you, whatever this 15 lakh, 30 lakh, 20 lakhs, this has been given to you. Cost to date, which is the cost that has incurred to you till date, on whatever date this data was collected. This is 6 lakhs, 1350, 9 lakh, 950. This has been given to you. Total amount that you have billed to the client is also given to you, which is 8 lakh, 12 lakh, 12 lakhs and 10 lakhs. And then estimated cost to complete the remaining work, right? This is a cost that has incurred to you, and then the remaining cost that you are estimating at this point of time is also given to you, 850, 11, 10 and 1150, right? This is the basic information you need in order to calculate all the information that we need. So the first thing that we can do is to estimate how much is the revenue. For that, you need to have a percentage completion estimation. Percentage completion estimation, the method that we use is the cost incurred to date divided by total cost, which is cost that has incurred already plus the expected cost that you are going to have from this point onwards, right, for project completion. So the current estimated total cost is essentially sum of column 3 and column 5, right? Make sense? So this is 6 lakhs plus 850, 1450 for project 1, 1350 plus 11, 2450 for project 2, 9 plus 10, 19 for project 3, 950 plus 1150, 21 for project 4. Clear? Right? Now estimated profit or loss, again you don't have to necessarily do in this same sequence. That's also true. All these columns I'm just, ultimately what we have to do is we have to calculate the project completion and the revenue that you have actually built. That's the amount that you finally need. You can shift the calculation according to you, whatever works for you. If you are comfortable, let's just complete the basic calculation of revenue estimation that we have already started. So we have estimated the total cost. We can estimate now the percentage completion, which is essentially the cost incurred till date divided by the estimated total cost. So if you do that, all these numbers will come, right? So your revenue that you should ideally be earning by this moment will be essentially what? Your percentage completion multiplied by total project contract amount, right? So this is essentially 2 multiplied by 8. The 2 is the contract amount and the percentage completion, right? So I'm skipping the steps a little bit. I'll come back to each of the every column. Don't worry about it. But these are distributed over, it's basically a long table. So it's distributed over multiple sheets. So amount earned or to date, which is essentially revenue, is percentage completion multiplied by the total project cost, right? So that comes out to be 41.38 multiplied by 15 lakhs. That amount comes out to be 6,20,960. Similarly, you can estimate the same amount with everyone else for every other project. Based on this, you can easily calculate whether you are overbilling or underbilling. Billing information is given to you. Essentially, overbilling is what? Billed to date minus revenue. The amount that you have billed to date is given in column number 4 minus your revenue is essentially the overbilling, and if your revenue is higher than the billed amount, then you are underbilling. So you can estimate that numbers here easily. So you can recognize that in your project 2, you have not billed enough. You have not submitted the bills to the client in a progressive manner, while in all other projects, you are on a positive side. So by this kind of a overview, you can estimate, hey, maybe in project 2, I need to improve either my processes of submitting the bill, or if the client is not working properly, do I need to do some such other measures of project management so that I start receiving my payments quickly, right? Essentially, that kind of an information you can easily estimate. Since you have also completed the project completions information, this kind of an information can also be used to estimate whether you are likely to make a profit or not a profit, because you have the total cost at this stage of time that you are expecting, and you know the total contract value, so that remaining is your profit, right? So if you do this calculation again and again, your total estimates of the cost will keep on updating, and accordingly you will be able to know whether your profit levels are going higher or lower. So comparing this same data across multiple time periods, you can also tell whether this particular project is moving towards being unprofitable, or do you need to do a cost control measures or not, right? So straight away from this information on a single sheet, you will not be able to tell, but tracing the same information over multiple periods, you can tell whether this particular project is moving towards higher profitability or lower profitability, or what's happening, right? So you can figure out those things as well. Just to give you an idea, in this particular case, what is happening, the total profit for first project is coming out to be 50,000 rupees, which is the contract value minus your total cost estimated till date, right? Makes sense? So you are expecting that this project will give you 50,000 rupees profit at this moment. This will give you 5,50,000, this will give you 1 lakh. But project 4, the total cost is 21 lakhs. The total project amount is 20 lakhs. So you know that you are already 1 lakh in loss in this particular case, right? Now, just purely from an accounting perspective, profits you also distribute in terms of the percentage of project completion. Profit recognized till date is same as the total profit and the percentage completion of project. So this is the numbers. But losses You know that this is going to have loss of 1 lakh rupees. Losses, you recognize complete losses immediately. You do not give losses a weighted average or a weighted distribution. Anyone can think of why? Can anyone think of an idea why? Why do you recognize the losses immediately? Complete losses, whatever you are thinking, you already recognize them in your balance sheets, but your profit is already only proportioned to the project completion, not full profit you recognize. Not necessarily eliminating losses, but essentially to give a more objective picture of your company's financial health to the outside evaluators. What if you are not recognizing the loss today, but it will suddenly come in your balance sheet? If a person wants to purchase your company or buy your company or invest in your company, if you are not recognizing the losses now, they will not have a good picture, because nobody asks about future documentation. The result happen on the existing information. So profit, you are giving them, okay, this much I have already 100% sure that this much profit has come. The rest of the profit is still dicey, right? There is some probability associated with it. What if you start going overshoot the cost now? It might change, right? So therefore, you do not put that uncertainty in your balance sheet. But losses, you are for sure you know that 1 lakh loss is definitely going to occur, no matter what you do from at this stage onwards. So you immediately start recognizing this. So anyone who wants to have a idea about how to evaluate this particular company, they immediately know that they have not inflated their profit and they have not downplayed the losses that this company is expected to have. It's pretty clear to everyone who is interested in investing or assess the financial health of a company, right? So this is the principle again from an accounting side. The losses, whenever you are sure that this loss is going to happen, you immediately start showing the full losses, but the profit are typically in proportion to the project completion, because that profit has not occurred yet. So you don't want to give a wrong picture that this much profit I will make. There are other ways to show that I am going to make this much profit and this is my projections and so on and so forth. This is not the only measure that people use to invest in companies, but the principle remains the same, right? Clear? How to use this information about the same 4-5 matrices, and then across different projects you can get an idea of which project is doing what. Are there some projects which are already in loss versus making profit, versus are there projects where billing is not happening on time? Should I need to take some actions? This kind of information you can build kind of a dashboard at a HQ level, you can build on it, right? Okay, any questions on this? This is the end of this simple topic. Any questions here? That depends. Overbilling is possible because do you know the concept that we use in project management, which is what? Front loading of activities. Do you know the concept of front loading? So it's like the actual activity or actual cost schedule is different compared to what you have pre-agreed with the client, right? Pre-agreement happens on a certain progress benchmarks, that if you have made so much progress, you are entitled to have so much money. That may or may not be directly proportioned to the percentage of completion of the project. What happens is sometimes the contractor pushes the rates of the project, rates of the activities which are occurring early in the project stage. So they inflate those prices and then they deflate the prices later on. So they recognize this money early on in the project, right? So it's called front loading of your project prices. So they'll have like more margins inbuilt while they're quoting in the activities which are earlier in the project compared to later. So overall you are still on the same balance, so you're not losing on the money, but still as a contractor you get as much as money early in the stage of the project. So that can happen here. This is very real, and to a certain extent even clients allow it and they know it. There is no way for you to really control it very micro unless you know your numbers thoroughly, which in many cases you never know because each project is so unique. So bill of quantities are different, bill of materials are different. So it is easy for contractors to do this. And clients most of the time do not have the real market rate available to them. There is no no portal telling me that today this is the rate of cement bag. There's no real-time data about that. This is more on, okay, how people are dealing in the market currently. So they use it. Yeah, as a client, you should be aware that contractor may be overbilling you. So do you want to allow that or not allow that, right? Sometimes it's possible that if you are not allowing this overbilling, the project may not even happen. So it's not the client always is in a condition of not giving money. They also want the project to be executed, right? And once the contract has been awarded, if the project gets halted because of the money issue, it's equally bad on the client side also, because they have also responsible for finishing up the project in time. They also have to say responses to somebody else. So these things happen in contracts. Okay. Any other questions? Okay. All right. Then we will start with a new topic. All right. So I'll go a little bit more detail into the accounting concepts from now onwards. This lecture we will just introduce some of the terms, assets and liabilities, and next couple of lectures we will just look at what are the balance sheets, how to prepare them, things like that. Again, this is not an accounting course. We will not go really detailed, but through a simple manner you will be able to understand the balance sheets and the profit loss statements and all. Assets are something that help you generate revenues, right? This is essentially part of your business. Could be machinery, could be land, could be equipment, could be human resources, whatever you own that is helpful for you to generate revenues, right? Liabilities, depreciation, yes, assets may depreciate. Depreciation is a concept of change in value of the asset, but liabilities are different. Asset is something that you owe, you have it. Liabilities is something that, yeah, that is your responsibility, you need to pay it back, right? So essentially your asset is something that is legally yours, you can use it for your businesses. Liabilities are something that you need to pay back in some form or the other. We will look at those examples. This is, of course, it's a concept more from project finance and corporate finance kind of thing, but personal level also this is pretty much the same concept. You all have assets. The money in your personal bank account is your assets. If you own any gold jewelry, any watches, anything, any car, any house, all this is assets, unless your house is mortgaged. In that case, it is not an asset. And the liabilities are, maybe if you have borrowed some loan from a bank, then you need to repay it. Many other cases are there for liabilities. You could be paying insurance monies and things like that. So these are part of your liabilities, right? But the definition is more from a financial perspective, from a company perspective, is that asset is something that can help you generate something that you legally own and that can help you generate revenues for your business, right? So let me just give you a couple of examples. So assets are the items of value owned by the company. What happened? Yeah. So assets are items of value owned by the company either as a cash or otherwise, which is convertible into money. So assets are convertible. There is a concept of equivalent cash for each asset, right? And they have to be legally owned economic resources. If you have something that you have not acquired legally, it cannot be part of your assets, company's assets, right? So from a financial perspective, the legality is very important aspect to recognize something as an asset, right? And this is essentially that provides future benefits to your business. For example, a piece of land that you buy today helps you generate revenue because it helps you operate production facility on a particular for let's say next 10 years and so on and so forth, right? Cash helps you generate money. You need to pay your laborers in order to keep them working and maybe keep running the production facilities and so on and so forth, right? So some example of assets are cash, accounts receivable. Do you know, we discussed this term, what is accounts receivable? So account receivable is precisely the concept that you asked about, is the money that you are supposed to receive. It could be from client. In this case, you have supplied the product, but you are sure that you will get the money back. So you show this as an asset, right? Prepaid expenses, if there are some expenses that are likely to occur, but you have already paid them. For example, you got a land for 10 years lease and you paid the lease in advance. So then you don't need to pay, that's your asset, right? Because you've already covered that expenses. Equipment, machinery, land, piece of land, all these are examples of assets. Okay. Some more detailed information. Cash is essentially the funds available at an instant with future benefits in terms of the purchasing power. Like cash is the most easiest form of buying anything. That's the most acceptable form. Accounts receivable is something, the funds that you are expected to receive in future on account of goods or services that you have already provided. So it's like on credit you have given something, you will receive that money, you have already fulfilled your commitment to that transaction. So you can show that as part of your assets. This is the money that is going to come in your account soon. So for example, an electricity company sends bills to client after they have used the services. Typically you get your Bijli ka bill after your consumption of that particular month, right? On the basis of the quantum of power that you consume. So while the company waits for customers to pay their bills, typically you get 10 to 15 days to pay your bills, the company can show that amount in their assets, because they're sure that you will receive this money. If one customer defaults, you know for sure that they are not going to pay, then you need to reduce that amount from your assets so that you are not over-inflating your asset. It could happen, there's always risk in terms of credit recovery, and that certainly accounts. Again, the same principle. If you know a person has defaulted, immediately you need to update your books to show that. Right? Prepaid expenses are assets paid for initially that have benefits over future. For example, you can pay rent before using a commercial space, or equipment you can pay for its uses before you actually start using. So that's part of your asset because you no longer have to pay that money, right? Typically, assets are classified into two distinctions. One is fixed asset and second is current assets. Any idea? What are fixed assets and what are current assets? Have you heard the term current assets? No one follows the financial markets. Nobody's investing money. Two poor civil engineers. But that should be motivation to invest money, right? Yeah, it's okay, you guys are just students. So, essentially the distinction between fixed and current is related to the amount of time that you expect to convert them into equivalent cash. For example, current assets are something that within a year, you are likely to convert these into an equivalent cash. Versus fixed assets are something which remain for rather long term on your assets and are not immediately convertible in that sense, right? So that 1 year boundary is again from a financial perspective, because financial accounting principles happens every year. You need to generate your accounting statements, you need to make it public, you need to report it to the authorities. Therefore, anything lower than a year is reported as current assets. More than that, it's reported in fixed assets, right? But in fixed assets, there are two types, tangible and intangible. This is English word. What is the meaning of tangible? Something that is physically existing. Yeah, easiest definition is something that you can touch. And intangible? Conceptual. Yeah, you could argue about that. But easy definition is something that you can't really touch that way. So tangible assets are, of course, fixed assets are slightly long term. You can't easily convert them into cash immediately. So example of tangible fixed assets would be land. Typically, you would expect that land will be there for longer. You are not expecting to sell it immediately if a company is working for long. Your plant and machinery, buildings and so on and so forth, right? These are typically the example of long-term fixed assets. They are not necessarily always, I'm not saying that buildings will always be tangible fixed assets. If a building is supposed to, for example, get demolished in this financial year, it shifts from the long-term fixed assets to a current fixed asset. So it's not like a buildings always are fixed asset, things like that. That does not happen. Criteria is within 1 year, if you expect it to convert to an equivalent cash, it should reflect in your current assets account, right? Then intangible is intellectual property that a company holds, patents. some sort of copyrights. If you are a company which is working on copyrights, goodwill is again a technical term. It's not like a normal English term that we use, but essentially the same, that you are showing something in good faith and you will receive money for that or some sort of a benefit. So that benefit is quantified and put it in terms of your assets here also, right? Could be CSR amount that you have already paid. That could be part of your assets, that because it's the expense that you are already paid for that much year, right? This particular year. Currently, on the other hand, the current assets is assets of short duration. Could be bank balance, cash, stocks. Debtor is again the debt amount that you hold, right? These are something typically you would expect to pay within the one financial year, and therefore these are shown as the current assets. Okay, any questions so far? Easy? Okay, so just to give you a little bit more definitions, fixed assets are meant to serve for long term, generally for more than a year. These are essentially long-term fixed assets are really important because they show that your company has a futuristic plan. It's not going to dissolve in a year. So therefore, you should have a reasonable proportion of assets tied up in fixed assets rather than showing as a current assets. It clearly shows that you are here for doing long-term business, and it essentially provides means for company to produce goods and services for more than a year. And it's essential to need to run the business continually. And can be, essentially this is same language repeated here and there. Got the idea? What are fixed assets? Tangible assets. Within the fixed assets, we have further classified in tangible and intangible. So tangible is something which is physical items that a company owns, including the buildings, land, machinery, furniture. And again, these are fixed assets, so they are not intended for sale in normal course of business. Right? One more thing. For a real estate company, is building an asset compared to a construction company is building an asset. Or a Tata company, for example, selling cars, is building an asset for them compared to a real estate company which is in business of selling buildings is building an asset for them. So this is also an important distinction, is the assets that you are showing are typically, that is something which is not your major business. If you are in business of selling buildings, then you might have buildings in your less than 1 year stock, not in such kind of stock. You may even call it as an inventory. Inventory is something that goods that you are trying to sell, right? But for a company who is not in business of selling buildings, they need assets like building to maybe just run their operations. It is part of the assets, right? So that distinction also is there, that ultimately this should not be, this distinction also depends on what is your business. So it could also go to inventory side, it could go to some other different terms are there. We will look into those things. But primarily assets are something that are required for you to do business. They are not your main business. You are not in your business of selling the assets that you are calling them. Okay? This concept is clear? For a machine making company, the number of machines in your stock is not, it is a form of asset, but that's not a tangible asset or like a fixed asset. That is more sort of an inventory that you have not sold, right? That's the kind of distinction that I'm trying to just give you a heads up. We will look into it in more detail. And then there are intangible assets like non-physical items, could include internet domains. This became quite an interesting form of assets. Early 90s, when a lot of the internet boom was just starting, a lot of people who were aware of domain, they just paid like very small amount to buy popular or likely to be popular internet domains. For example, Mercedes-Benz had to pay really huge money to finally get a domain called Mercedes-Benz, because somebody had already bought it before the Mercedes was even aware that internet is going to be big thing in a few years, right? Many things. It's still a business. Many people do this. If you will see, like in India, all these car dekho, coffee dekho, rent dekho, bike dekho, everything is sold. Because these are the typical, from a search engine optimization perspective also, these domains are likely to be the name of the next startup. And therefore, You just invest in just the value of it, right? How many of you, for example, have your email address only of your name, except a number? How many of you have? Just few, only hands few, right? This also becomes like a critical thing, because your name, Coca-Cola @ something something, if you want to buy that now, it's almost impossible, right? Because the brand equity is so strong associated with it. So yeah, it happens, right? Then, so this is, some companies are in that business, so it is an asset for them. It's not like they are not in that. I think even this, what is the name of Lenskart guy? Piyush. He has all the cart.com in India. He has bought the domains, internet domains for that. So this is a real business, not something that you can not acknowledge, right? Similar to licensing agreements, software, trade secrets. Any idea about trade secrets? Are you aware of any trade secrets? Not that you are aware, in a way that you know of their existence, not that you know what the trade secret is. Anyone? Famous example? Coca-Cola recipe, that's a huge trade secret. Even the bottlers of the plant, they rarely get access to what exactly is in that concentrate. So yeah, these kind of things are part of the company's assets. Patents, trademarks, copyrights, all these are intangible assets, right? They add to company's future worth and sometimes can be more valuable than your worth, right? If you remember, I don't know if you have seen the documentary on the music platform. What was that? I'm forgetting the name. Spotify. So Spotify earned a lot more in their patents that they had developed a few technology to really get the fastest downloading at that point of time. They earned much more in those patents than their main business of the music selling. And this happens in the internet domain. You develop a tech which is so universal, so accessible to all, you actually earn a lot of money using that instead of the main business that you are doing. So it can be a huge amount. So you need to recognize that, right? There's also something called brand equity, which is not part of the formal assets or accounting statements of a company, because it's difficult to put a value on brand equity. But any idea what is brand equity? Like perception of how valuable a particular brand is, right? For example, Apple. Like immediately you tend to associate Apple with simplistic design, the good quality, and that kind of a trust. How do you value that? Right? That plays strongly when you are comparing alternative, when you are making your buying decisions consciously and unconsciously, that plays. Coca-Cola used to be a huge, like their advertisement, like all those things was really so subtle that you will immediately associate a drink with Coca-Cola. Tata Namak in India, Colgate in India. You don't call it as toothpaste, you call it a Colgate. But Colgate is a brand. Colgate is not the only company which makes toothpaste. But you still go to the brand and they'll buy a Colgate dena. You buy whatever Pepsodent, Meswak, whatever. But you ask for Colgate. Right? These kind of things are part of the, of course you cannot formally recognize them, but there are also intangible assets of some form. Right? Because you have invested a lot in doing that sort of marketing. Right? It becomes, your brand becomes a household name. So therefore it's some sort of recognition is there, but it is typically not done on financial books. And actually a lot of companies, sometimes you leverage this to skew the investor's mindset. Like we had an example of Satyam Computers. If it is a big brand, you do not doubt their financial conditions immediately. And sometimes they leverage this brand name to escape from the real bad condition of their financial health. Not particularly Satyam Computers, of course there's a lot more controversy in there, there's not the only thing. But essentially this is also a tool which companies recognize that they can sometimes escape. So this is important, although it is not allowed to be formally on your balance sheets or account sheets. Okay? Can be negative and positive, do not have a measurable or fixed monetary value, and therefore it is not part of the formal books, but it plays informal, quite significant role sometimes. Okay? Then current assets. Current assets are something that the company plans to use up or convert into cash within 1 year from the reporting date. So these assets are either they will be used within the year or equivalent form of cash will come into your account, or basically you'll sell or whatever you will. These assets will no longer be there in your books 1 year from now. So these are called current assets, such as cash, inventory, accounts receivable and short-term investment. These are essentially your current assets. So inventory is classified as a current asset because cash is expected to be generated when the company sells the inventory. And typically, you do not expect that you will take 1 year to sell your inventory. If that is happening, then you are in a very difficult business. So therefore, inventory is allowed on like a current asset kind of a thing. Account receivable should also bring inflow of cash. You are not expecting that you will not get paid for more than a year, right? That much credit you typically do not have in businesses. So typically these are part of current assets. Any questions, doubts so far? Chill enough? Okay. Then there is another, this is just a classification just for your knowledge, but this does not fit in our fixed asset and current assets kind of paradigm, but something called financial asset versus non-financial asset. Do you know what is financial asset? Or when you make personal investments, a lot of time people say that financial investment versus non-financial investments. Have you heard this term? To a certain extent, yes, there is a direct economic value, but let me give you a little bit more nuanced example. Like your money, your 100 rupees note or your 500 rupees note is essentially a promise by the government that if you will pay this note to somebody, it is equivalent to 500 rupees, right? But there is no, so currency is also of two types. I don't know if you know that. There's something called a fiat currency versus non-fiat currency. Fiat currencies were, or I might be wrong, but essentially in one sort of a currency, if the country was releasing a 500 rupees note, 500 rupees equivalent of some sort of a mineral, typically gold, was supposed to be in the bank, reserved in Reserve Bank of India, right? Then only if you have so much gold, then you can issue currency notes worth so much gold. That was the original concept of all the currencies, which is non-fiat currencies, I would say. Now that is no longer true. The total currency notes in the market are not equivalent to, the total value of them is not equal to the RBI's gold reserves, right? And this started, almost every currency in the world is a fiat currency right now. It's not actually backed by goods of equal worth, right? That's how the financial system currently is. So ultimately a note, a rupee currency note, is also just a promise by the government. It's a contract between you and government that it is equivalent to 500 rupees. But it's not actually equivalent to 500 rupees. The real cost of a note is what? Just 10 rupees, not even that of the actual money. And there's no equivalent gold deposited in the Reserve Bank India. So this is not equal to the real money. But then there are, if you buy gold, for example, you have the physical access to the gold as a quantity, then you can sell that on a market price and that's always there. So that's not a contract amount. That's a physical possession of a quantity that you can monetize. Compared to currency notes and all these things are called financial instrument, which are more contractual in nature. Somebody has given you assurance that this is worth this today. And you just believe in that contract. When the entire things go down, that contract also gets nullified. We have seen historically how the currencies devaluates and all. We are not going into details of that today, right? But essentially that's the distinction. So financial asset is a tangible liquid asset that does not have any inherent physical worth, like a land or a machinery. 100 rupees note has no worth in terms of, if you were to sell 100 rupees for its cost of goods or the paper or that all the tech that goes into making 100 rupees, nobody will pay you 100 rupees, right? It's just the contract that this is 100 rupees. Similarly, government bonds, there are no physical assets linked to those bonds. This is just a, okay, if you give us money today, we will make sure that we will give you 5% return on it. Where the government will generate that 5% return? Because your currencies are more or less non-fiat, fiat currencies and things like that. Again, not going into that cycle because I completely do not understand to comment it, but essentially you get the idea, right? So, coming back to our topics, financial assets is something which is not inherently a physical worth like a piece of land or a machinery and things like that. Okay. Then there's a concept of liquidity of assets, which informally I have already introduced, but this is essentially the ease with which an asset can be sold or bought without affecting its price. Okay, so that's called the liquidity. I'll give you an example. Suppose these are the kind of assets: real estate, machinery, furniture, stocks, account receivable, demand deposit, cash in hand. What do you think is more liquid? Cash is the most liquid, and then accounts receivable are more or less liquid because you will get a cash equivalent sooner or later. Correspondingly, real estate, on this relative term, real estate is typically not easy to get immediately converted to the real cash. Therefore, it is lower in the rank of liquidity. So, this is the general principle in which your financial statements are made. They are represented in the increasing liquidity as you go from top to down. So, first you will always see the first set of assets will always be least liquid assets in any company's banking financial statements, which is the asset and the accounts, all I will introduce later. And then most liquid items comes towards the end, right? This is the financing principle that we use. You can also see the lower in this table is the current assets, the higher in this assets is more or less fixed assets. So it falls in the same paradigm. Okay. Any other questions here so far? So let's stop here. I just have to finish this, but I will start from here to next class.